In this last part of the series, I will continue in a northeasterly direction along the shore of Lake Erie from Monroe, Michigan, near Toledo, Ohio, to Fort Erie, Ontario, which is directly across the Niagara River from Buffalo, New York, where the parts of this series on Lake Erie began. So far, I have looked in depth at cities and places on the shores of Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Ontario, and Lake Erie. I have paid particular attention to lighthouses, railroad and streetcar history, waterfalls, wetlands and dunes, interstates and highways, golf courses, airports and racetracks, major corporate players, mines and mining, labor relations, and many other things. As a way of focusing my research, I'm specifically following the location of lighthouses and waterfalls around Lake Erie as a way of focusing my research, as I've been doing throughout this series. This particular focus has yielded a great deal of information as to what looks like happened here and about our hidden history. I believe there was an original free energy grid that was intentionally destroyed and was a worldwide event, and that the surface of the Earth was subsequently destroyed around its key infrastructure, which included components like lighthouses, rail infrastructure, canals, waterfalls, and what we know of as forts, and turned the landscape we see today into lakes, dunes, deserts, swamps, bogs, or causing the land to shear off and or become submerged. My name is Michelle Gibson. Before I move on, starting with Monroe, I would like to revisit a couple of places from the area surrounding Toledo from the last part of the series. The first thing I want to talk about this area is in the context of the historic Great Black Swamp. U.S. Highway Route 20 crosses along northwestern Ohio at the southern shore of Lake Erie, where the historical Great Black Swamp was located. The section of US 20 between Perrysburg, Ohio and Fremont, Ohio started out as the 31-mile or 50-kilometer long Maumee and Western Reserve Road, or Mud Pike. We are told that at the time it was being developed in the late 1700s, what became the Mud Pike was the most direct and passable route through what was described as the nearly uninhabitable swampland. The 1795 Treaty of Greenville at the end of the Northwest Indian War had opened up the Northwest Territory for settlement, but the Great Black Swamp stood in the way between the newly acquired Northwest Territory and settlers. The Mud Pike was called the worst road on the continent early in its existence for the mud holes that would trap wagon wheels and draft animals and its slow travel, though it was gradually improved as the swampland was drained in the mid to late 19th century. I found this newspaper clipping from the Newark Advocate in 1902 in my past research, describing a giant skeleton that was found in Bowling Green in northwestern Ohio that was over 8 feet or 2.5 meters tall. Bowling Green in Ohio is located within the Great Black Swamp between Fort Wayne in Indiana and the southern shore of Lake Erie in northwest Ohio, and is the location of the Black Swamp Preserve. The original Black Swamp was a huge 900,000 acre or 364,200 hectare wetland that once covered northwest Ohio, and only a tiny fraction remains today. The 500-acre or 202-hectare Black Swamp Preserve in Bowling Green is a protected remnant of the historical swampland and is accessed by a 13-mile or 21-kilometer paved, slippery elm trail from Bowling Green to North Baltimore, Ohio. It is also interesting to note all the historic rail lines that go through the same area as the Great Black Swamp in northwest Ohio, circa this 1914 Ohio Public Utilities Commission railroad map of Ohio, with Bowling Green, where the giant skeleton was found, circled in red. The story that accompanies the existence of the railroads is that they were all constructed after the swampland was drained, and that was what made the construction of the railroads possible. But I continue to have serious doubts that railroads were constructed by the people who said they built them when they were said to have been built. My belief falls along the lines that they were already there and being made serviceable once again after the swampland was drained and or reclaimed. The second thing I want to bring forward from the last part on Lake Erie is that Lake Erie is noteworthy for its role during the War of 1812. It was a location of some battles during the War of 1812 in our narrative, specifically at Fort Stephenson in Fremont and Fort Meigs in Perrysburg, and is noteworthy for the Perry Monument on South Bass Island at Put-in Bay. First, Fort Stephenson. Here's what we're told in our historical narrative, keeping in mind that at the same time in the same narrative, this place was supposed to have been a muddy and swampy mess. Fort Stephenson was first built as a stockade and blockhouse in the late spring of 1812, but was abandoned after Detroit was captured by the British and indigenous forces on August 13th of 1812 and was burned to the ground shortly thereafter. Then, in preparation for a campaign to retake Detroit and advance into Upper Canada, several forts were constructed in the area by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in 1813, including the rebuilding and expansion of Fort Stephenson and the construction of Fort Meigs. Then the Battle of Fort Stephenson took place on August 2nd of 1813, in which a small American force numbering 160 guarding the fort defeated a much larger number of 1,300 British and indigenous forces. The American victory here was said to have helped secure American control in northern Ohio. The cannon from the battle, named Old Betsy, was said to have been recovered and is on display at the Burchard Library in Fremont. The Burchard Library is located on the grounds of the former fort in Fremont and said to have been built between 1877 and 1879. Next, Fort Meigs was on the Maumee River in the Perrysburg area. In this instance, the British and indigenous forces failed to capture Fort Meigs in two sieges that took place during the spring and summer of 1813, which had just been built earlier that same year. Fort Meigs subsequently became the main American stronghold in the Northwest. The location of Fort Meigs was just across the Maumee River from the ruins of what we are told was the old British Fort Miami and the site of the 1794 Battle of Fallen Timbers, which was the final battle of the Northwest Indian War. This is what we are told about the Northwest Indian War in our historical narrative. The Northwest Indian War took place in this region between 1786 and 1795 between the United States and the Northwestern Confederacy, consisting of Native Americans of the Great Lakes area. The territory had been granted to the United States by Great Britain as part of the Treaty of Paris at the end of the American Revolutionary War. The area had previously been prohibited to new settlements and was inhabited by numerous Native American peoples. The British maintained a military presence and supported the Native American military campaign. While the Northwestern Confederacy had some early victories, they were ultimately defeated, with the final battle being the Battle of Fallen Timbers in August of 1794 in Maumee, Ohio, which took place after General Anthony Wayne's army had destroyed every Native American settlement on its way to the battle. Outcomes were the 1794 Jay Treaty, named for Supreme Court Chief Justice John Jay, the main negotiator with Great Britain. We are told that as a result, the British withdrew from the Northwest Territory, but it laid the groundwork for later conflicts, not only with Great Britain, but also angering France and bitterly dividing Americans into pro-treaty Federalists and anti-treaty Jeffersonian Republicans. The 1795 Greenville Treaty that followed forced the displacement of Native Americans from most of Ohio in return for cash and promises of fair treatment, and the land was opened for white American settlement. At any rate, with regards to Fort Meigs and Fort Miami, I typically find star forts in pairs and clusters, which also aligns with the definition of the word battery related to a device that produces electricity, may have several primary or secondary cells arranged in parallel or series. Fort Meigs was also the location where the Treaty of Fort Meigs, also called the Treaty of the Maumee Rapids, was signed on September 29th of 1817, and said to be the most significant Indian treaty in Ohio since the Treaty of Greenville in 1795. It resulted in the ceding of nearly all the remaining lands in northwestern Ohio and parts of Indiana and Michigan, of the Wyandot, Seneca, Delaware, Shawnee, Pottawatomie, Ottawa, and Chippewa, helping to open up Michigan to settlement by white Americans. In return, land was allocated for reservations and financial compensation via annuities of various amounts for different lengths of time. Lewis Cass was one of the two commissioners who negotiated the treaty on behalf of the United States government. We are told that during the War of 1812, Lewis Cass rose through the officer ranks to become a brigadier general in the United States Army in March of 1813. Lastly, the Perry's Victory and International Peace Memorial is found on an isthmus on South Bass Island, the world's tallest Doric column. It was said to have been constructed by a multi-state commission between 1912 and 1915 after having been selected as the winning design from an international competition. According to our historical narrative, the memorial was established to celebrate long-lasting peace between the United States, Great Britain, and Canada, and honor Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry, who successfully commanded the U.S. Navy ships in the Battle of Lake Erie during the War of 1812. In our historical narrative, The Battle of Lake Erie, also known as the Battle of Put-in Bay, was fought on September 10th of 1813, and in which 9 ships of the U.S. Navy captured 6 ships of the British Navy, ensuring American control of Lake Erie for the rest of the War of 1812. The Battle of the River Raisin during the War of 1812 took place in what became Monroe, Michigan. The Battle of the River Raisin, also known as the Battle of Frenchtown and the River Raisin Massacre. It refers to 2 consecutive engagements during the War of 1812 that took place on January 18th and 22nd of 1813 in Frenchtown in the Michigan Territory, the former name of Monroe. In our historical narrative, on January 18th, American militia forced a retreat of a British and indigenous detachment occupying Frenchtown. 4 days after that, British and indigenous forces launched a surprise counterattack in which 397 American troops were killed and 547 taken prisoner and taken to Fort Amherstburg, aka Fort Malden, in Amherstburg, Ontario, on the Detroit River, which I will talk about more later in this video. We are told the Battle of the River Raisin was the deadliest conflict recorded on Michigan soil and represents the highest number of Americans killed in a single battle during the War of 1812. It is interesting to note that there are 3 sets of railroad tracks altogether on either side of the historic location of this Battle of the War of 1812. I will come back to what is in Monroe in the area surrounding this location shortly. Monroe is the only Michigan city situated directly on Lake Erie's western shore, and is the only deep-water Michigan port on Lake Erie. It is 17 miles or 27 kilometers north of Toledo, and 35 miles or 56 kilometers south of Detroit. Lake Erie is the 4th largest Great Lake by surface volume, but the shallowest and smallest by volume of the 5 lakes, and has an average depth of 63 feet or 19 meters, and is divided into 3 basins: western, central, and eastern. This part of Lake Erie is in the western basin, which is quite shallow, with depths ranging throughout from 0 to 10 meters or 33 feet. It is particularly susceptible to pollution, algae blooms, and other invasive species like carp and mussels. The eastern basin is the deepest, with depths ranging from 0 to 64 meters or 0 to 210 feet, where the deepest point of Lake Erie is marked by an X circled in red, making it the only Great Lake whose deepest point is above sea level. The depth contrast of the shallow western end and the deep eastern end results in a phenomenon known as a seiche, which happens when strong winds push the lake water east, causing the water to pile up and then drain, and which Lake Erie is more prone to than the other Great Lakes. A seiche is the name for a standing wave in an enclosed or partially enclosed body of water. The seiches of Lake Erie are known to drain water out of one end of the lake and cause extreme flooding at the other end. Lake Erie is also the warmest of the Great Lakes because it is the shallowest and frequently reaches peak water temperatures in the 70 to 80 degree Fahrenheit range or upper 20 degrees Celsius range in the summer months of July and August, and more during heat waves. The Lake Erie region is known as the thunderstorm capital of Canada as well, with impressive displays of lightning. The relatively shallow waters found throughout the Great Lakes are notorious for shipwrecks, with an estimated somewhere between 6,000 to 10,000 ships and somewhere around 30,000 lives lost. Lake Erie has one of the highest concentrations of shipwrecks anywhere on Earth, with an estimated 2,000 sunken vessels, and only 400 of those have been discovered. The Erie Marsh Preserve is south of Monroe and north of Toledo on North Maumee Bay, and is one of the largest coastal wetlands on Lake Erie. It is to the west of the Turtle Island Lighthouse and the Toledo Harbor Lighthouse, and to the southwest of the Luna Pier Lighthouse. The Lost Peninsula on Maumee Bay is south of the Erie Marsh Preserve. The Toledo Harbor Lighthouse is described as a Romanesque-looking structure that stands 64 feet or 20 meters tall at the entrance to the Toledo shipping channel. The Toledo Harbor Lighthouse's original 3.5 order Fresnel lens is on display at the Maumee Bay State Park Lodge. In a Fresnel lens, hundreds of pieces of specially cut glass surround a lamp bulb, which intensifies the glow from the light and focuses rays of light that would normally be scattered into one intense beam of light that shines in a specific direction. The Fresnel lens could also produce an unlimited number of flashing combinations with an intensified light that could be seen at great distances. Of the more than 200 lighthouses across the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River region, out of an original estimated 350 to 400 lighthouses, only 16 have their original Fresnel lens, like the Dunkirk Lighthouse on Lake Erie, not far from the greater Buffalo area. The third order Fresnel lens at the Dunkirk Lighthouse is currently valued at USD $1.5 million. The historic Turtle Island Lighthouse is described as a deactivated and ruined lighthouse on a privately owned island in Lake Erie on the border between Ohio and Michigan near Toledo. We are told it was established in 1831 to guide ships into Maumee Bay and abandoned after the construction of the Toledo Harbor Lighthouse. The Luna Pier Lighthouse is at Luna Pier, which is in the state of Michigan. It is described as a 35-foot or 11-meter tall decorative beacon that was constructed in 2012 to serve as a non-navigational scenic landmark at the entrance to the Luna Pier. Though references to it are hard to find, I did find one saying that the current Luna Pier lighthouse was designed to evoke an earlier lighthouse associated with Luna Pier. Luna Pier has a crescent-shaped concrete pier that extends for 800 feet or 240 meters, reaching about 200 feet or 61 meters into Lake Erie. Luna Pier used to be served by the Canadian National Railway via coal trains that served the J.R. Whiting generating plant, which closed in April of 2016 and which has since been demolished. The J.R. Whiting generating plant first opened in 1952, so it was only in use for 64 years. The Erie Marsh Preserve is located in North Maumee Bay and at over 2,000 acres or over 800 hectares in size is one of the largest marshes on Lake Erie. It represents 11% of southeastern Michigan's remaining marshland. It supports migratory and nesting birds of all kinds and is open to the public from January 2nd to August 31st. The Lost Peninsula, just to the south of there, is called a small exclave of the state of Michigan, as it is surrounded by the state of Ohio. We are told the Lost Peninsula was created as a result of the Toledo War, which was a boundary dispute in 1835 and 1836 over whether or not Ohio or Michigan would control an area called the Toledo Strip. After the Toledo War, the state border was established just north of the mouth of the Maumee River at the 41° 44' north line of latitude. This gave the city of Toledo and Maumee River to the state of Ohio, but the state line continued across the smaller Ottawa River and divided the peninsula on the far side of the river. This resulted in a division of the land in which the Lost Peninsula became part of the state of Michigan. Coincidentally, or not, the 41° 44' north line of latitude was historically significant as the reported position of the Titanic when it sank. The Lost Peninsula has a population of somewhere between 100 and 200 people. It is part of Erie Township, Michigan, and residents must travel through Ohio to get to Michigan, including students for public school attendance. I keep encountering and documenting historic trolley parks all along the shores of the Great Lakes. This area in western Lake Erie was no exception, and was also the location of several historic trolley parks, like the Toledo Beach Amusement Park, a short way up the shore of Lake Erie from Toledo in Ohio before you get to Monroe in Michigan. We are told the Toledo Light Rail and Power Company bought the Ottawa Beach Resort in 1907 and created the Toledo Beach Amusement Park, and an electric trolley service brought visitors from Ohio into the park. The trolley also made stops at Lakeside, Lakewood, Allen's Cove, and Luna Pier along the way to Toledo Beach, the end, also known as terminal, of the streetcar line. There are two definitions of terminal. One is the end of a railroad or other transport route, or a station at such a point. The other is a point of connection for closing an electric circuit. We are told that the peak of the popularity of the Toledo Beach Park was in the early 1900s, and that attendance slowly declined after the electric interurban trolleys stopped running in 1927. The Toledo Beach Park had its ups and downs over the years, having been shut down during hard economic times, until the amusement park was purchased in 1961 for the land on which the buyer wanted to build a marina. The Toledo Beach Amusement Park was dredged, and the Toledo Park Marina was built and opened in 1962. Heading into Monroe from the historic Luna Pier and Toledo Beach Amusement Park, we first come to the Bulls Harbor Lighthouse, and then in the area surrounding the River Raisin National Battlefield Park, we come to the Monroe Power Plant, the Gerdau Special Steel Plant, the Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge, and the William C. Sterling State Park. First, the Bulls Harbor Light. We are told that Bulls Harbor was an artificial recreational harbor that was constructed in the 1960s, and that the entrance to it had to be dredged through the shallow Lake Erie waters. The Bulls Harbor Light is a modern navigational beacon that marks the entrance to Bulls Harbor, about 7 miles or 11 kilometers south of Monroe at the entrance to La Plaisance Creek. Bulls Harbor is used for recreational boating. There are 2 range lights here as well that are skeletal structures for guiding boats into Bulls Harbor. There were historic lighthouses here that are no longer standing. We are told that Monroe's first lighthouse was built at Otter Creek Point in 1828, marking the original River Raisin entrance. Then it was decommissioned in 1849 when shipping lanes shifted and was dismantled in 1870. The Monroe Pierhead Lighthouse was said to have been first established in 1849, first lit in 1884, deactivated in 1916, and eventually destroyed. On the lakefront to the north of the Bulls Harbor Light and the east of the River Raisin National Battlefield Site, we find the Monroe Power Plant, the Gerdau Special Steel Plant, the Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge, and the William C. Sterling State Park. The Monroe Power Plant and Gerdau Special Steel Plant are located right next to each other, with the Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge located right across the entrance to the River Raisin from them. The Monroe Power Plant is a coal-fired power plant owned by Detroit-based DTE Energy. Operations began here in 1971, and it has 4 generating units. It is the 11th largest electric plant in the United States. The Gerdau Special Steel Plant in Monroe is a key facility for Gerdau Special Steel in North America. It specializes in producing high-quality, special bar quality steel for the automotive, commercial vehicle, agricultural, and energy markets. The Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge is the only international wildlife refuge in North America, managed jointly by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Canadian Wildlife Service. It consists primarily of coastal wetlands, several islands in the Detroit River, and waterfront parks. The refuge's Eagle Island Marsh is next to the River Raisin entrance. It provides important habitat for hundreds of bald eagles that winter here every year. The River Raisin National Battlefield Park is to the northwest of the Eagle Island Marsh, and the William C. Sterling State Park is to the north of it. The Monroe Golf and Country Club is further west across the railroad tracks from these locations. This is what we're told about the William C. Sterling State Park. It is the only Michigan state park located on Lake Erie. It encompasses 1,300 acres or 530 hectares of mostly man-made lagoons and beachfront near the mouth of Sandy Creek. It was named after the businessman who bought marshland at the mouth of the Detroit River, who was one of the first to see the value of protecting swamps for future generations. For a number of years, the Sterling State Park was polluted by river runoff from Detroit. Millions of dollars were spent to clean up the area from decades of pollutants from the Detroit River. The Monroe Golf and Country Club is a semi-private golf club that was established in 1919. It features an 18-hole golf course and what we are told was an 1884 Victorian mansion. I have consistently found golf courses, country clubs, and railroad tracks near the shores of the Great Lakes. For one of many examples, and this one is also on Lake Erie, the Wanaka Country Club is in between New York Route 5, otherwise known as the Seaway Trail, and the railroad tracks going through the area, and the Cloverbank Country Club is on the other side of the tracks from it. I have been talking throughout this series, and in other places before that, about golf courses being cover-ups of mound or earthwork sites and part of the original energy grid. Just carve out the top of a mound and voila, you have a bunker. The term links is another name used for golf courses. I think this name tells us their actual purpose on the Earth's grid system, perhaps as links or linkages of the circuitry of electrical and magnetic components. I've been finding golf courses throughout this series, like along the shoreline of Lake Huron, like these examples. And like this example on both sides of the Niagara River on Lake Ontario. As we are heading into the Detroit area from Monroe, we next come to the Enrico Fermi Nuclear Generating Station. the Point Moulet State Game Area, and the Detroit River Lighthouse. First, the Enrico Fermi Nuclear Generating Station. It is located on 1,000 acres or 400 hectares of land near Monroe in French Charter Township, Michigan. The plant is named after the Italian nuclear physicist Enrico Fermi, most noted in our historical narrative for his work on the first nuclear reactor and other major contributions to nuclear physics, and winning the 1938 Nobel Prize in Physics. There are a couple of things I would like to make note of here. The first thing is that I consistently find nuclear power plants in or near wetlands, and this is not an isolated finding by any means. The second thing I would like to make note of here is that this is the 6th nuclear power plant that I've come across while doing this Great Lakes series, and all have been right on the lakeshore of their respective Great Lakes. There was one in the last part of the series on Lake Erie, which was the David Bessie nuclear power plant. It is located on the southwest shore of Lake Erie, about 10 miles or 16 kilometers north of Oak Harbor, Ohio. It is situated next to the Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge and the McGee Marsh Wildlife Area. It has been the site of several safety incidents, including 2 of the top 5 most dangerous nuclear incidents in the United States since 1979. It was expected to close in 2020, but remains operational as a result of state legislation that was passed in 2019. So was there actually a conscious decision made to build nuclear power plants in marshy wetlands? Or were nuclear power plants also pre-existing technology that was brought back online in the present day and not operated safely or cautiously? The Perry nuclear power plant is also on Lake Erie and located 40 miles or 64 kilometers northeast of Cleveland. The other 3 I've encountered were the Darlington Nuclear Power Station in Bowmanville, Ontario, on Lake Ontario, the 9 Mile Point Nuclear Power Station near Oswego, New York, on Lake Ontario, and the Bruce Nuclear Power Plant in Kincardine, Ontario, on Lake Huron. The unincorporated community of Detroit Beach is located in between Sterling State Park and the Enrico Fermi Nuclear Generating Station. It was established in 1932 as a lakeside resort community to attract vacation home buyers from Detroit. It is centered around boating and fishing and is not known for being a large public swimming beach, for which most go to the nearby Sterling State Park. The Point Moulet State Game Area and the Detroit River Lighthouse are to the northeast of the Enrico Fermi Nuclear Generating Station. The Point Moulet State Game Area is a protected wildlife and wetland area at the mouth of the Huron River at Lake Erie. It contains an extensive mix of coastal marshes, managed wetlands, shallow bays, dikes and impoundments, and grasslands. It is considered one of the largest freshwater marsh restoration projects in North America. It is also widely regarded as one of the best places in the Midwest for bird watching and waterfowl hunting. What is known as the Banana at this location is described as a large curved diked island just offshore of the main marsh. It was said to have been originally built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as a confined disposal facility for dredged sediment from the Detroit River shipping channel. These days it provides access to portions of the interior marsh via the dike system, and it is also managed as a waterfowl refuge. The area is also a productive fishery. The nearby Detroit River Lighthouse, also known as the Bar Point Shoal Lighthouse, is described as a spark plug lighthouse that was built in 1885 under problematic circumstances due to its particular location. We are told its isolation has caused problems ever since in its storied past, including being a rendezvous point for rum runners in the Prohibition years with the proximity of Canadian whiskey, and being struck by a lake freighter directly in 1997, in which the lighthouse suffered minimal damage and the freighter was described as having its steel bow pushed in like a tin can. Moving northward from the Point Moulet State Game Area on the Michigan side, we come to the Lake Erie Metro Park and its golf course, the city of Gibraltar, the Humbug Marsh, and what's found on Grosse Ile, the largest island in the Detroit River. First, the Lake Erie Metro Park and its golf course. The Lake Erie Metro Park is a park in the Huron-Clinton system of metro parks, which includes 13 parks totaling more than 24,000 acres, or 97 kilometers squared, arranged along the Huron and Clinton rivers, forming a partial ring around the Detroit metropolitan area. The Lake Erie Metro Park is located between the mouth of the Huron River and Lake Erie to the south, and the city of Gibraltar to the north, and consists of marshes, recreational trails, a marina, and boat launch. Since 2020, the wave action swimming pool here has not been in operation and is currently undergoing a major renovation. There is an 18-hole regulation golf course here that features rolling bent grass fairways and 20 acres or 8 hectares of water hazards that test precision on nearly every hole. The Lake Erie Metro Park Marshland Museum and Nature Center is also found here, which showcases the heritage of the downriver Lake Erie shore region. The city of Gibraltar is located in between the Lake Erie Metro Park and the Humbug Marsh. Gibraltar is a downriver suburb of Detroit, located 22 miles or 35 kilometers southwest of downtown Detroit. As of the 2020 census, it had a population of just under 5,000 people. Gibraltar was first settled in 1811 and platted in March of 1837 by the Gibraltar and Flat Rock Company, which we are told was a historic company attempting to build a canal to connect Lake Erie to the Huron River, which was a venture we are told ultimately failed. Gibraltar is known for its waterfront lifestyle, with over 5 miles or 8 kilometers of canals, wetlands, and access to the Detroit River and Lake Erie, making it a prime destination for boating and fishing access. I consistently find S-shaped river bends, like the one pictured here in Gibraltar, all over the earth. Victor Schauberger, an Austrian scientist, was a pioneer in the field of water and energy research in the early 20th century, specializing in the flow of water and natural energies. Between 1928 and 1935, he worked on developing a device for the production of living water, water with an enhanced structure and necessary minerals. Schauberger believed that the twisting and turning motions of this water flow energized water. Conversely, he believed that modern industries destroy healthy water, including the processes of municipal water treatment plants, which decompose healthy water. The original rivers, rail lines, and canals would have been providing hydroelectric power for the free energy system, and the original architecture and infrastructure would have provided the antiquitect to process and utilize the free energy throughout the worldwide system. The City of Gibraltar Municipal Complex is interesting in that it features a lighthouse as part of the complex. The complex houses things like City Hall, the fire station, and police department. It was said to have been built to replace the old City Hall, which was housed in a one-room schoolhouse and demolished in 1935. Interesting to note that available public sources consistently described it as a replacement for the old City Hall building, but do not state the exact year the new municipal complex was completed. The village of Flat Rock, 5 miles or 8 kilometers due west of Gibraltar, was platted by the Gibraltar and Flat Rock Company in 1838. We are told that Henry Ford was attracted by the water power of the Huron River and established the Ford Motor Company lamp factory in Flat Rock for making headlights in 1925, one of Ford's village industries that employed local people and supplied parts and equipment. It was powered by hydroelectric turbines on the Huron River. Albert Kahn, who was credited with the design of the headlight factory, was also credited with the design of the Fisher Building in Detroit in the Art Deco style, said to have been completed in 1928. The Fisher Building, with its distinctively Moorish-looking interior with high-vaulted ceilings, is in what is called the New Center, a commercial and residential historic district in Detroit. The Canadian National, or CN, Flat Rock Railroad Yard is to the northeast of Flat Rock, and the Flat Rock Speedway is to the southwest. The CN Flat Rock Yard is one of the Canadian Railroad's most important rail facilities in southeastern Michigan, located near downtown Flat Rock. It serves as a major freight classification and rail operations yard and crew base for trains moving between Detroit, Toledo, Chicago, Canada, and the U.S. Midwest. We are told that it was historically built by the Detroit, Toledo, and Ironton Railroad, or DT&I, in the early 20th century. Under the ownership of Henry Ford, starting in 1920, DT&I expanded the yard into a modern classification facility to support the movement of raw materials and finished automobiles to Ford plants throughout southeast Michigan. Historically, there was a roundhouse here, and like pretty much everywhere else, the roundhouse is long gone. What we are told is that large roundhouses became far less necessary as diesel locomotives replaced steam in the 1950s, and the roundhouses were no longer needed for routine operation. Diesel locomotives replaced steam trains primarily between 1940 and 1960. Interesting to note that locomotives were originally powered by steam, and in our historical narrative, were first introduced in the United Kingdom in 1804. They were fueled by burning combustible material like coal, coke, oil, or wood to heat water in the locomotive's boiler. Here's one that is pretty typical of what we would normally think of as a steam locomotive. Here's another steam locomotive that looks pretty darn sleek, futuristic, and high-tech. It was called the Mallard steam locomotive. It was said to have been created by the prominent engineer Sir Nigel Gresley for the London and North Eastern Railway and built in 1938. On July 3rd of 1938, the Mallard broke the still-standing world record for steam locomotives at 126 miles per hour or 203 kilometers per hour. It was retired in 1963 and is preserved in the National Railway Collection in New York. I think that steam and hydroelectric power were part of the free energy technology of the original grid system, and that this was one of the original steam locomotives in use prior to the destruction of the grid, and not built when it was said to have been built, and by whom. For whatever the reason they were demolished, and I strongly suspect it's not what we've been told, roundhouses are no longer in existence, except in rare instances where they are museums and parks, like the B&O Railroad Museum in Baltimore, Maryland, and Roundhouse Park in Toronto, Ontario, which was formerly the John Street Roundhouse, and which contains the Toronto Railway Museum. It's important to note that Henry Ford utilized the practice of vertical integration in the Ford Motor Company. Vertical integration is where the supply chain of a company is owned by the company. The introduction and refinement of the assembly line facilitated the mass production of new cars, which in turn made the purchase of a new car affordable for most people. I believe this was another replacement technology for the original transportation system, which was powered by free energy. Henry Ford was the 13th wealthiest American of all time, according to CNN Business, with an adjusted wealth of $67.2 billion. Henry Ford was also an acknowledged 33rd degree Freemason. Also interesting to note that another extremely wealthy businessman and entrepreneur who practiced vertical integration was Adolphus Busch, president of the Anheuser-Busch Brewing Company from 1880 until his death in 1913. Adolphus Busch was a pioneer in refrigeration and pasteurization, and like Henry Ford, he bought all the components of his business, from bottling factories to ice manufacturing plants, to buying the rights from Rudolph Diesel to manufacture all diesel engines in America. The Anheuser-Busch Company owned the manufacturer's railway company, which was founded by Adolphus Busch in 1887 and operated until 2011. It was created to transport brewery products and provide rail connections and locomotive maintenance. When Adolphus Busch died in 1913, his net worth was $60 million. While I couldn't find any information showing that Adolphus Busch was a Freemason like I did Henry Ford, I did find this goat mug that was made in 1994 by Anheuser-Busch for the Freemasons of Rio Negro in Brazil, featuring a lifelike goat head and the Portuguese words for liberty, equality, and fraternity in the base. Similarly, John Molson was a brewer and entrepreneur in colonial Quebec and Lower Canada. Molson's beer was in high demand, which was said to have appealed to different classes of Montreal society, with customers increasing every day. Between 1788 and 1800, his business quickly grew into one of the larger ones in Lower Canada, having sold 30,000 gallons or 113,500 liters of beer by 1791. As his wealth grew, he started branching out into financing other interests like the railroad. Molson was credited with financing the first public railway in Canada, the Champlain and St. Lawrence Railway, which was chartered in 1832 and built in 1835 in our historical narrative. He was appointed the Provincial Grand Master of the District Freemasonic Lodge of Montreal by the Duke of Sussex in 1826, a position he held for 5 years before resigning in 1831. Next, the Flat Rock Speedway is in Ash Township to the southwest of downtown Flat Rock. It is a quarter-mile or 402-meter oval racetrack owned by NASCAR and the closest NASCAR-style oval racing track circuit to Detroit. It features racing on Saturday night that include outlaw body late models, street stocks, and figure eights for its weekly division. I have come to see racing tracks as circuitry that was on the Earth's original energy grid system as a result of my research over the years, and I think these different types of racing tracks were originally circuits on the grid. The sport of racing uses the word circuit in the following ways: the course over which races are run, the number of times the racers go around the track, an established itinerary of racing events involving public performance. And in bicycle racing, a circuit race is a mass start road cycle race that consists of several laps of a closed circuit, where the length of the lap is slightly longer each time. Electrical circuit definitions include a closed path in which electrons from a voltage or current source flow, and includes devices that give energy to the charged particles the current is comprised of, such as batteries and generators. Devices that use current, like lamps, electric motors, and computers, and the connecting wires or transmission lines. An electronic circuit is a complete course of conductors through which current can travel and provide a path for current to flow. So with regards to the possibility that elliptical tracks, for example, were circuitry on the Earth's original energy grid, when I investigated elliptical circuitry in past research, I came across elliptical pads, PADS, in printed circuit boards, PCBs. Pads are an electrical connection point for components, and most carry current for either signal transfer or heat. I also found the term elliptical polarization, which occurs when there is more than one source of a magnetic field at the same frequency. The magnetic field traces out an ellipse in space. Then there are elliptical antennae for things like satellite dishes and ultra-wideband communications. Next, I'm going to talk about the Humbug Marsh and several places on Grosse Ile, which is located on the Michigan side of the Detroit River. First, the Humbug Marsh. The Humbug Marsh straddles the boundary line between Gibraltar and Trenton. The Humbug Marsh is part of the previously mentioned Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge. It is located on the downriver shoreline of the Detroit River. Downriver is a region of the Detroit metropolitan area along or near the western shore of the Detroit River. This location consists of 410 acres or 165 hectares of undeveloped mainland shoreline along the United States side of the Detroit River. The remnant marsh here is classified as a place of importance to threatened, endangered, and vulnerable species and ecological communities. It features old-growth trees over 300 years old, with over 32 acres or 13 hectares recognized by the Old Growth Forest Network. The Humbug Marsh was formally designated in 2010 as Michigan's first wetland of international importance under the Ramsar Convention. I first became aware of the Ramsar Convention when I was tracking a long-distance alignment through the Strait of Hormuz between the Gulf of Oman and the Persian Gulf. The Ramsar Convention is an international treaty that was first signed in February of 1971 in Ramsar, Iran, and is reviewed every 3 years by the contracting international parties. It designated sites, known as Ramsar sites, to be considered of international importance when it comes to the conservation and sustainable use of wetlands. As one example, the United Arab Emirates, or UAE, as a whole has 8 Ramsar wetland sites. Interesting to note that the UAE is mostly a desert country with approximately 80% of its landmass covered by desert. The Ramsar Convention defines wetlands as areas of marsh, fen, peat, or water, whether natural or artificial, permanent or temporary, with water that is static or flowing, fresh, brackish, or salt, including areas of marine water the depth of which at low tide does not exceed 20 feet or 6 meters. The High Calc Corp. And 2 more rail yards in Trenton are near Humbug Marsh, besides the Flat Rock Rail Yard, the C.N. Edison and the C.N. Rodney yards. The High Calc Corp. And C.N. Edison yard are adjacent to the Humbug Marsh. The High Calc Corp. Is a specialized metal processing manufacturer. It operates North America's only 100% hydrogen annealing line, providing advanced high-strength steels for the automotive industry. The C.N. Edison Yard is a small operational rail facility serving local industrial rail traffic on the C.N. Shoreline subdivision, which handles freight movements running parallel to the Detroit River corridor. It is named the Edison Yard because of its historic proximity to the massive Detroit Edison, or DTE, coal-burning Trenton Channel power plant operations on the Detroit River, which was in operation from 1924 until 2022, and the facility was demolished in 2024. The land is currently being transformed into the Trenton Channel Energy Center, designed as a 220 megawatt lithium-ion battery storage facility with completion expected in late 2026. It is described as the largest standalone battery project in the Great Lakes region, capable of powering an estimated 40,000 homes. The Trenton Engine Plant is also in this location. The Trenton Engine Complex is a Stellantis North America factory complex. Stellantis was formerly known as Chrysler. There are two plants here, and both manufacture Pentastar V2 and V6 engines. There are a couple of places I would like to note between here and the C. N. Rodney Yard, in particular Elizabeth Park in Trenton, and the 3 golf courses directly across the Trenton Channel of the Detroit River from here on Grosse Ile. Elizabeth Park is recognized as the first county park in the state of Michigan. Having been given to Wayne County in 1919 from private owners, the park is located on an artificial island called Slocum's Island. The island is separated from the mainland by a narrow canal, with Elizabeth Park on the north end, and the location of the historic Trenton Channel Power Plant in the process of becoming the Trenton Channel Energy Center on the south end of Slocum Island, south of the Grosse Ile Parkway across the Wayne County Bridge. There are 3 golf courses on Grosse Ile directly across from here: the Water's Edge Grosse Ile Golf and Country Club and the West Shore Golf and Country Club. The Wayne County Bridge, also known as the Free Bridge, is a swing bridge that pivots on a center pier that connects Grosse Ile to Trenton, Michigan. It was previously a rail bridge that we are told was converted by Wayne County into a vehicular, bike, and pedestrian bridge in 1931, which would have been during the Great Depression. I can't help but wonder if artificial island is a code word for sunken infrastructure. We are told the rail bridge was built by the Canada Southern Bridge Company in 1873, and that the rail tracks across Grosse Ile were replaced by the Grosse Ile Parkway, which runs adjacent to the Water's Edge Golf Course and the Grosse Ile Golf and Country Club. Elizabeth Park is the location of an historic marker commemorating the Battle of Mongaguan, which took place during the War of 1812 in our historical narrative between Americans and a British Indian coalition in August of 1812. We are told that it was the first encounter of the War of 1812 that was large enough to be called a battle. Next up, the C. N. Rodney Yard in Trenton. The C. N. Rodney Yard serves as a vital rail junction on the C. N.'s Shoreline subdivision, where it connects with the Flat Rock subdivision running west towards the major Flat Rock Yard. It is a crucial control point and connection switch where freight and local transfers transition between lines. It was the location of the historic FN Tower, a classic railroad interlocking tower where the Detroit, Toledo, and Detroit shoreline tracks crossed. We are told the FN Tower was demolished in 2005 because it became obsolete when manned railroad control towers were replaced by modern centralized traffic control. I just want to make note before I move across to Grosse Ile that there are a lot of rail yards along both the United States and Canadian sides of the border between Lake Huron and Lake Erie, which consists of not only the Detroit River, but also Lake St. Clair and the St. Clair River between Lake Huron and Lake St. Clair. Detroit is the end terminal for most domestic traffic arriving there, much of which is automotive industry related, and is also an international gateway for transcontinental traffic from the western United States and Canada to Toronto, Montreal, and the maritime provinces. As I've already asserted in this video, it is my belief that all the rail infrastructure was a pre-existing energy technology, and I would surmise that this region was an extremely important nexus on the original energy grid. Here's just one example I encountered from North America's Great Lakes, Part 4, the Ontario side of Lake Huron, which is the Canadian National Railway's St. Clair River Railway Tunnel, located about 60 miles or 100 kilometers northeast of the Detroit-Windsor area. It connects the Sarnia rail yards with the Port Huron rail yards via an underwater railroad tunnel that can accommodate double-stacked rail cars. The first tunnel here was said to have opened in 1891, and that it was the first full-sized underwater tunnel in North America. It was considered an engineering marvel in its day, and has been designated as a civil engineering landmark by U.S. and Canadian engineering bodies. The original tunnel was said to have been replaced in 1995 when a second tunnel opened that could handle rail cars with double-stacked shipping containers. In June of 2019, 40 rail cars derailed in the tunnel, spilling 13,700 gallons or 52,000 liters of sulfuric acid, which resulted in the closure of the tunnel for about 2 weeks. Sulfuric acid is used in chemical and fertilizer manufacture, petroleum refining, battery production, cleaning agents, and explosives. These kinds of environmental disasters are actually quite common, and I'm comfortable speculating that there may be more to their occurrence than random chance. Next, I'm going to head over to Grosse Ile, the largest island in the Detroit River and a residential township of between 10,000 and 11,000 people in Wayne County, Michigan. It is considered one of the downriver communities south of Detroit. Besides the Wayne County Bridge, also known as the Free Bridge, a swing bridge that connects Grosse Ile to Trenton, Michigan around the center of the island, the Grosse Ile Toll Bridge is also a swing bridge that connects Grosse Ile at the northern end to the mainland at Riverview, Michigan. The Grosse Ile Toll Bridge was said to have been financed, designed, and constructed between 1912 and 1913 by the Grosse Ile Bridge Company, or GIBC, which was established as a Michigan corporation and bridge company on May 1st of 1912. Its primary incorporator, majority shareholder, and founding president was Grosse Ile landowner Edward W. Voigt. We are told the bridge was opened to the general public on November 27th of 1913, and that the toll bridge was the first automobile bridge to the island at a time when the island's population was less than 1,000. Ownership of the Grosse Ile Toll Bridge was transferred from the GIBC to the Grosse Ile Township on March 31st of 2025. It's interesting to note that Riverview was the location of a Nike missile launch site designated Site D-54 during the Cold War. The Nike missile launch site was located on what is now Young Patriots Park, and the Integrated Fire Control, or IFC for it, was located at what is now the Rivergate Nursing Home and Terrace. The Rivergate Highlands Golf Course is just a short distance south of there. Hennepin Point at the northern end of Grosse Ile was named after the 17th century French explorer, Father Louis Hennepin, who is said to have traveled through the Great Lakes region with the French explorer La Salle in 1679, and that they explored the Detroit River region. Father Hennepin is probably best known for being credited with having been the first European to see the Niagara Falls. Father Hennepin was a contemporary of the French Jesuit Father Jacques Marquette, who explored all over Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, and Green Bay in our historical narrative. While the Franciscans were members of related religious orders said to have been founded by the highly venerated and gentle St. Francis of Assisi in 1209, the patron saint of animals, the environment, and Italy, I think the Franciscans played a similar role as the Jesuits with regards to what took place here in subverting the indigenous peoples and real history of the Americas. The Franciscans were called the vanguard of missionary activity in the New World, but I definitely think they were on the active part of the cover-up and subversion of the original advanced civilization and its people here and in other parts of the world. Father Hennepin was said to have left written journals describing the wild animals and abundant fruit orchards of Grosse Ile. While we are told commercial fruit production shifted elsewhere, the island's agricultural legacy is carried on by the Westcroft Gardens and Farm, the oldest family-owned and operated farm in the state of Michigan, that was established on July 6th of 1776 in our historical narrative, owned and operated by 8 generations of the Macomb family. Hennepin Point is described as an uninhabited 225-acre or 91-hectare section at the northern tip of Grosse Ile. It is known for a mix of historic maritime landmarks, wetlands, and long-standing environmental contamination concerns, including but not limited to toxic mercury waste. It is separated from the rest of Grosse Ile's main island by a narrow canal. Hennepin Point is a location of the Grosse Ile North Channel Front Range Lighthouse. It is the only historic structure remaining of what were said to have been 2 sets of range lights on the North Channel and South Channel constructed in the 1890s because of a dangerous obstruction on the east side of Grosse Ile. Grosse Ile is described as a peaceful residential township. The East River Road Historic District is along the East River Road near the eastern end of the Grosse Ile Parkway. The district is called a small island community consisting of 11 structures, including 7 houses, 2 outbuildings, St. James Episcopal Church, and the Michigan Central Railroad Depot. This is what we are told. These homes were built primarily in Gothic Revival and Swiss chalet styles, in both limestone and wood, for Detroit's affluent families, facing the Detroit River with pleasant views and large yards. Like the Gothic Revival wedding cake house, said to have been built in 1859 for Samuel Lewis, a prominent Detroit banker. The Samuel T. Douglas House, Anthony Dudgeon House, and St. James Episcopal Church were said to have been designed by Gordon W. Lloyd, an English-born architect who practiced in the American Midwest from the 1850s to the 1890s. Gordon W. Lloyd was also credited with the design of such buildings as Building 50, described as the massive Victorian Italianate centerpiece of the Northern Michigan Asylum in Traverse City, Michigan, a Kirkbride facility that first opened in 1885. It was saved from demolition and today is the village at Grand Traverse Commons, featuring condos, shops, and restaurants. So the former Northern Michigan Asylum Kirkbride facility was redeveloped as a multi-use facility after years of sitting abandoned, though it also has a reputation of being haunted, which is more typical than not of these places. In 1854, Dr. Thomas S. Kirkbride first published what was considered the source book in the 19th century for psychiatric directives, entitled On the Construction, Organization, and General Arrangements of Hospitals for the Insane, with some remarks on insanity and its treatment. We are told that throughout the 19th century, numerous psychiatric hospitals were designed and constructed according to the Kirkbride plan, mainly across the United States. And while numerous Kirkbride structures still exist, many have been demolished, partially demolished, or repurposed, like the former Northern Michigan Asylum. The former Michigan Central Railroad Depot still stands in the East River Road Historic District, and along with the former Customs House of the Canada Southern Railway, are part of the Historical Museum of the Grosse Ile Historical Society. This location is right next to the Detroit River, where it forms the international border with Canada. We're told that in 1873, the Canada Southern Railway established a freight system across Grosse Ile, ferrying goods and passengers from Amherstburg, Ontario, to Stony Island, part of Michigan's Grosse Ile Township, and today an uninhabited island used by the public for fishing and hunting, then transporting them via rail across Grosse Ile, where the Grosse Ile Parkway is now, to the mainland across the previously mentioned former railroad bridge, that is the Wayne County Bridge. Crystal Island is located on the international border and is part of Amherstburg, Ontario, and is a nature preserve. With its distinctively pointed shape, it is called an artificial island that was said to have been created to provide and make a deeper shipping lane. And there are still railroad tracks in Amherstburg right across the Detroit River from the location of the historic railroad depot and customs house, and the Point West Golf Club just above the railroad tracks. Today, we are told Amherstburg has no active heavy rail passenger or commercial train operations running directly into the town core today, as its historical steam and electric lines have been converted into heritage sites and public recreation greenways, like the Gibson Gallery and the Cipher Systems Group Greenway. We are told the Gibson Gallery was the town's original 1892 Michigan Central Railway station that was saved and designated under the Ontario Heritage Act, and now operates as an art gallery and cultural space. The Cipher Systems Greenway is a 14-mile or 23-kilometer multi-use rail trail in an abandoned rail line that runs between Amherstburg and Essex, where it connects with the Chrysler Canada Greenway. Besides the historic Michigan Central/Canada Southern Railroad, another historic rail line here was the Sandwich, Windsor, and Amherstburg Railway, which was an electric interurban streetcar line connecting Windsor, LaSalle, and Amherstburg from 1903 until interurban rail service ended in 1938. More on Amherstburg to come shortly. Fighting Island is to the northeast of Grosse Ile in the Detroit River. Fighting Island is the largest Canadian island in the Detroit River and part of the town of LaSalle, Ontario, In 1918, Fighting Island was purchased by John Ford of the Michigan Alkali Company and was used as a location to deposit waste from their industrial plants, which produced soda ash, lye, and baking soda, and nearly 20,000 yards squared, or 15 million meters squared, was dumped on the island in its industrial history, which ended in 1982. The Michigan Alkali Company became the Wyandotte Chemicals Corporation, which was subsequently bought by BASF, a German multinational company and the largest chemical producer in the world, who currently owns the island, and we are told successfully removed the waste for proper disposal and rebuilt the natural habitat of the island. BASF now manages Fighting Island as an ecological restoration and wildlife habitat area. BASF operates a major chemical manufacturing facility across from Fighting Island in Wyandotte, Michigan. It generates $1.9 billion in annual economic impact and employs a significant portion of the region's workforce. There are 31 charted islands in the Detroit River, most of which are small, uninhabited, and on the American side of the river. Here is an historic map showing 22 of the islands. It is interesting to note that one of the islands, Zug Island, a private island just to the south of the city of Detroit, is described as an artificial island that was once connected to the mainland at the mouth of the River Rouge, but we are told its original landowner, Samuel Zug, had a small canal created to set the land off as an island. The island became the site of several steel mills in 1902, in what was called the Age of Rapid Industrial Development along the Detroit River. Zug Island still houses a large steel mill today owned by U.S. Steel, with no public access allowed. It is known as one of the most intensely polluted industrial sites in the Midwest. The last place I'm going to look at on Grosse Ile is the Grosse Ile Municipal Airport on the southern end of the island. We are told that it started out in 1929 as Naval Reserve Air Base Grosse Ile, with a training base, seaplane base, and dirigible hangar. It was renamed Naval Air Station Grosse Ile during World War II, and the installation was operated until 1969, at which time it closed down and was turned over to the township in 1971 for use as a general aviation airport. Today, the Grosse Ile Municipal Airport is a general aviation facility and a local reliever airport facility for busy commercial hub airports. It was named as one of the top regional airports for corporate aviation by D-Business magazine in 2020. The airport at the southern end of Grosse Ile brings to mind the Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport, also known as the Toronto Islands Airport, named after the Canadian World War I flying ace and World War II air marshal. We are told that construction of the Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport was completed by 1939, which was the beginning of World War II, and that it had originally been conceived of as Toronto's main airport, but that distinction ended up going to the Toronto Pearson International Airport. The Billy Bishop Airport is used by civil aviation, regional airlines using turboprop airplanes, and air ambulances, and in 2022 was ranked as Canada's 9th busiest airport. Similar to the 31 charted islands that are found in the Detroit River, the Toronto Islands are a chain of 15 small islands off of mainland Toronto in Lake Ontario, a short ferry ride from downtown Toronto. The Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport is adjacent to Hanlan's Point Beach on Hanlan's Island. Hanlan's Point Beach was the location of the former Hanlan's Point amusement park and was considered Canada's answer to Coney Island in New York City. It operated from the 1880s until the 1930s, and in its heyday was one of Toronto's major attractions, with a roller coaster, miniature train, midway, grandstand, a vaudeville theater, and other attractions. We are told what was left of the park was demolished in 1937 to make room for the Toronto City Airport. The Gibraltar Point Lighthouse is also located on the southern end of Hanlan's Island, which is the most westerly of the Toronto Islands. The Gibraltar Point Lighthouse is said to be the oldest existing lighthouse on the Great Lakes and one of the oldest buildings in Toronto, with construction having started in 1808 and it was first lit in 1809. Decommissioned in 1956, it is still unused, though occasionally open for public tours, including on the Open Doors Toronto weekend. Important to note that the Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport also has the Riverdale Park track located northeast of it in a linear alignment that crosses through the real estate on the Toronto waterfront, containing the Union Station, CN Tower, Rogers Centre, Roundhouse Park, and an area of the city called the Railroad Lands. Similarly, the Grosse Ile Municipal Airport is in a linear alignment with the previously mentioned Flat Rock Raceway, also an area with major railway infrastructure like the CN Flat Rock Yard that at one time had a roundhouse, as previously mentioned. I have found countless examples in my present and past research of airports having some kind of track in linear alignments short distances away, just like what we're seeing here in Toronto and Grosse Ile. Also, like the location of the Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport with the former Hanlan's Point Amusement Park and Gibraltar Lighthouse, Bois Blanc Island, popularly known as Boblo Island, located in the Detroit River between the airport on the southern end of Grosse Ile and the city of Amherstburg on the mainland in Ontario, was the location of a former amusement park and has an historic lighthouse as well. The island is most famous for the Boblo Island Amusement Park on the south side of the island, which operated from 1898 to 1993. Visitors to the park would come via excursion steamships like the SS Columbia and the SS St. Clair from the Boblo docks in Detroit. The SS Columbia was said to have been built in 1902 and the SS St. Clair in 1910. They were said to have been designed by naval architect Francis E. Kirby. Each ship spanned 208 feet or 63 meters in length and 45 feet or 14 meters in width, and had a carrying capacity of 2,500 to 3,000 passengers. The boats featured dance floors, concession stands, and polished woodwork. We are told that regular steamship service ended when the park closed in 1991 due to rising costs and declining attendance, and were designated as National Historic Landmarks in 1992. The SS St. Clair suffered damage in a severe fire during restoration efforts in Detroit, and the SS Columbia was moved first to New York and later Ohio. We are told that in the early years of the Boblo Island Amusement Park, Henry Ford financed a dance hall that was rumored to have been designed and built by the previously mentioned Albert Kahn, but then it was determined to have been built by John Scott, another Detroit architect. We are told the dance hall was the second largest in the world, holding 5,000 dancers at full capacity. To me, the Boblo Dance Hall has that airship hangar look to it. The amusement park was left largely abandoned after its final closure in September of 1993, though parts of the property have since been redeveloped into a private upscale residential and waterfront community. The island has no bridges connecting to the mainland, but local ferries continue to serve the residents that live here. The park's rides were sold off in 1994, leaving empty grounds, overgrown paths, and decaying historic structures like its famous dance pavilion. In our historical narrative, the 40-foot or 12-meter tall limestone lighthouse was constructed on Boblo Island in 1836 as an aid to navigation at the mouth of the Detroit River, and that the island then served as a military outpost. The lighthouse was decommissioned in the late 1950s, but the structure remains to this day. Next, I'm going to cross over at this location near the entrance of the Detroit River to Amherstburg in Ontario and look at the Fort Malden Historic Site, the Amherstburg Navy Yard Historic Site, and the Bellevue Historic Site. We are told that Fort Malden was established here by the British in what became Amherstburg in 1796 following the loss of their 13 colonies after the end of the American Revolutionary War in 1783, and it was occupied as a garrison. The British presence in this area stimulated its development, and the Crown granted land to Loyalists in Upper Canada in compensation for losses during the Revolutionary War, or as payment for service during the war. Upper Canada was an historical colony in North America that existed from 1791 to 1841, covering what is now the southern portion of Ontario, and became the primary destination of Loyalists and settlers from the United States. Fort Malden was the location I mentioned previously where we are told American troops were taken as prisoners after the Battle of the River Raisin in January of 1813. It was also the location in our historical narrative where Sir Isaac Brock, a British Major General, and Tecumseh, a Shawnee chief and warrior who formed an intertribal confederacy to resist the expansion of the United States onto indigenous lands, meant to plan the Siege of Detroit, also known as the Battle of Fort Detroit, an early engagement in the War of 1812 that took place on the 15th and 16th of August of 1812, and in which the British indigenous forces were victorious. We are told the British held Detroit for more than a year before their naval squadron was defeated at the Battle of Lake Erie in September of 1813, which forced them to abandon the western frontier of Upper Canada. The Amherstburg Navy Yard National Historic Site is a 10.5-acre or 4.25-hectare waterfront public space on the Detroit River. In our historical narrative, it served as a key British naval station for Lakes Erie and Huron from 1796 to 1813, and it was operated by the Provincial Marine and the Royal Navy, and that it was abandoned and burned by retreating British forces in 1813. The Bellevue National Historic Site is described as a vacant, historic 1819 Palladian-style villa built for Fort Malden Commissary Robert Reynolds following the War of 1812, and he shared the villa with his sister, Catherine Reynolds, a noted 19th century artist. Over the decades, the villa has served as a private home, a World War I veterans convalescent hospital, and a Ukrainian Catholic church. It was said to have been built between 1816 and 1819, and one of only two Palladian-style domestic architecture buildings in Canada, but the historic property has been empty and faced severe neglect and deterioration for years. Though proposals have been made to redevelop and restore it, the restoration effort has hit economic roadblocks and is currently stalled. Palladian architecture was a European architectural style said to have been derived from Venetian architect Andrea Palladio, who lived between 1508 and 1580, whose work was based on the formal classical temple architecture of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Next, moving in a southeasterly direction on the northern Lake Erie shore from the Amherstburg area, I would like to talk about the area as a grape-growing and wine-producing region, Oxley Bluffs, the John R. Park Homestead Conservation Area, the Kingsville Rear Range Lighthouse, and the Kingsville Golf and Country Club. First, the Lake Erie North Shore is Canada's southernmost and oldest commercial grape-growing and wine-producing region with at least 20 wineries. It stretches from Amherstburg to Leamington in Essex County and includes Ontario's Pelee Island. The world's leading wine regions are between the 30th and 50th degree parallels north, and Ontario sits perfectly within this range at between 41 and 44 degrees north. Besides the Lake Erie North Shore region, which is on the same latitude as Napa Valley in California, Bordeaux in France, the Niagara Wine region on Lake Ontario's South Shore, and Prince Edward County on Lake Ontario's North Shore are acclaimed for their exceptional Ontario wines. I found the exact same thing all along the south shore of Lake Erie. The Lake Erie American Viticultural Area, or AVA, is a 53-mile or 85-kilometer-long grape-growing region covering 2.2 million acres, or 890,000 hectares, along the southern shore of Lake Erie, stretching from Toledo, Ohio to Buffalo, New York. It is the largest AVA east of the Rockies and known for its unique lake effect climate that is ideal for the growing of Concord grapes, among other varieties, as the shallow lake moderates temperatures from harsh winters, protecting the vines and extending the growing season. This includes the Lake Erie Islands, which have current and/or historic vineyards and wineries on Ohio's Catawba Island, the South Bass, Middle Bass, and North Bass Islands, Kelly's Island, and Ontario's Pelee Island. The North Bass Island is known as Isle St. George. As a matter of fact, the Isle St. George American Viticultural Area, which was established in 1982, is one of the most unusual wine regions in the United States, shown here on this map of the Ohio AVA along the southern shore of Lake Erie. Commercial grape growing on Isle St. George dates back to the 1850s, with more than half the island being planted in grapes historically and the island's primary industry. Almost 90% of the island is owned by the state of Ohio, featuring protected wetlands and vineyards. The Finger Lakes region to the south of Lake Ontario and to the east of Lake Erie, especially around Seneca Lake and Cayuga Lake, is another American viticultural area known for its grape growing and accounts for about 80% of New York State's wine production. The next places I want to look at are the Oxley Bluffs and the John R. Park Homestead Conservation Area. First, Oxley Bluffs are described as a scenic stretch of elevated shoreline along the north shore of Lake Erie in the hamlet of Oxley, near Harrow, in Ontario's Essex County. The bluffs rise 30 to 65 feet, or 10 to 20 meters above Lake Erie, and said to have been formed by glacial deposits and erosion over thousands of years. Oxley was a popular summer resort around the turn of the 20th century, with many visitors arriving by rail from Detroit to Harrow, and would travel to the bluff overlooking Lake Erie to stay at places like the Ravine Hotel. The rail line that came through Harrow was originally the Lake Erie and Detroit River Railway. It was said to have been founded by Hiram Walker in 1885 to connect Walkerville and Windsor and southern Essex County. Hiram Walker was a 19th century American entrepreneur that established a whiskey distillery that produced the top export whiskey Canadian Club in Windsor in 1890 in what was called a model community specifically for the distillery that became known as Walkerville. The Pere Marquette Railway acquired the Lake Erie and Detroit River Railway in 1903 and ran active passenger and freight services through southern Ontario to St. Thomas, roughly along the north shore of Lake Erie. Passenger service along this route ended in 1955, and CSX Transportation is the current owner of any tracks that remain in operation. The Windsor, Essex, and Lakeshore Rapid Railway was an historic 37-mile or 60-kilometer electric radial railway in southern Ontario, connecting cities from Windsor to Leamington from 1907 to 1932, and was dismantled completely in 1935. These radial railways, also known as interurbans, were electric passenger railway networks that radiated outward from major city centers like spokes on a wheel, connecting urban downtowns with surrounding suburbs, rural towns, and neighboring cities. The disappearance of the rail and interurban history here reflects the broader story of railroading that we've been seeing of rapid growth in the mid to late 19th century, peak influence in the early 20th century, and decline in the years preceding and following World War II in the 1930s and 1940s for the given reasons like increased automobile ownership, expansion of bus service, and better roads and highways. With respect to Oxley Bluffs, in this series I've been making note of the bluffs around the shores of not only Lake Erie, but all of the Great Lakes, and believe them to have been visible remnants of places where the land broke off or became submerged when the original energy grid was destroyed around key infrastructure of that energy grid, including but not limited to rail infrastructure, lighthouses, starports, canals, nuclear and other power plants, airports, and a sophisticated hydroelectric system that included waterfalls. So I'll insert here my belief that all the bluffs and cliffs we are seeing is where land was previously, and it sheared off and is now below the surface of the water. When the word sheer is used to refer to a cliff, it means a high area of land with a very steep side. One of the meanings of the word sheer, spelled with an A, is to break off or be cut off sharply. A synonym of the word for sheer cliff is bluff. Another meaning of the word bluff is a deception or an attempt to deceive. Next, the John R. Park Homestead Conservation Area. This is an Ontario Heritage Trust designated property that today is an agricultural and living history museum of farm life in the 19th century. We are told that it was originally the home of John and Amelia Park. I think living history museums and museums of all kinds, as well as expositions and exhibitions, are and were some of the ways the new historical narrative to explain the world we live in has been seeded into our collective consciousness. It was on land purchased by John Theodore and Thomas Park, who had moved from Massachusetts to Upper Canada, and purchased a 114-acre or 46-hectare lot on Lake Erie. The Parks brothers owned a sawmill, general store, Great Lakes shipping line, and were large landholders in the area. Next, Kingsville, the Kingsville Rear Range Lighthouse, and the Kingsville Golf and Country Club. Interesting to note that Kingsville has the distinction of being Canada's southernmost town. The area is one of Canada's most productive agricultural regions, famous for large greenhouse operations producing things like tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, strawberries, and flowers, along with its vineyards and wineries. Kingsville is near the previously mentioned Chrysler Canada Greenway, a recreational rail trail that was formerly part of the rail corridor for the Lake Erie and Detroit River Railway founded by whiskey magnate Hiram Walker. The rail line was abandoned in the late 20th century, and the corridor donated to the Essex County Conservation Authority. Chrysler Canada contributed funding toward converting it into a recreational trail, and the Greenway officially opened in 1997. The Greenway runs for 28 miles or 45 kilometers from the Windsor area through Essex County to Ruthven, just northwest of Kingsville. The Kingsville Rear Range Lighthouse is described as an historic wooden tower built in 1889 in the Kingsville Harbor to guide ships, and its active service ended in 1936. After retirement, it was moved to Kingsville Historical Park as a local heritage monument. Next up, the nearby Kingsville Golf and Country Club. It has been operating since 1925 and is one of Essex County's best-known golf facilities. The course is known for its rolling terrain, mature trees, and numerous bunkers and water hazards on many holes. Now we are heading into the Leamington area, where I am going to be looking at the Leamington Lighthouse, Raceway, Airport, Pelee Island, and Point Pelee National Park. Leamington is the second largest urban center in the Windsor-Essex region after Windsor, with a population of close to 30,000 people. Leamington is called the tomato capital of Canada. Today it's famous for its greenhouse industry, though it has a long history of field-grown tomatoes. Agriculture and food processing are the backbone of the local economy. Leamington grew quickly after the H.J. Heinz Company established a processing plant there in 1908, making ketchup and other tomato products. The tomato processing operation continued under new ownership after Heinz ended their operations here in 2014. Henry John Heinz was the founder of the condiment manufacturing H.J. Heinz Company. And during the mid-19th century, his parents emigrated from Germany to Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. By the time of his death in 1919, the H.J. Heinz Company owned over 20 food processing plants, as well as seed farms and container factories. Heinz merged with Kraft in 2015 to become the world's fifth largest food and beverage company. The Leamington Raceway is a standard-bred harness horse racing track that was established in 1900. It is located on the Leamington Fairgrounds, and although it is a small venue, it has hosted the Ontario Sires Stakes, one of the premier standard-bred harness racing programs in North America, and has long been an important stop for Ontario's harness racing community. The Leamington Airport is a short distance to the southeast of the Leamington Raceway. The Leamington Airport is a small public general aviation airport serving private pilots, business aircraft, flight training, agricultural aviation, and recreational flying. The Leamington Lighthouse is described as a square pyramidal wooden tower constructed in 1880 to guide ships into Leamington's port, and it was decommissioned in 1923. Here's an historic photo of it standing right next to what looks like sheared off land. Like what you see in this circa 1910 photo of the Outer Island Lighthouse in Wisconsin's Apostle Islands. There are 8 lighthouses in the Apostle Islands, a group of 22 islands in Lake Superior. So this is very much like the appearance of all the scattered little island groups we've seen thus far in this video in the Detroit River, Toronto Harbor, and Lake Erie. We are told the Leamington Lighthouse was moved from its original location to what became a privately owned community, now known as the Lighthouse Club, just north of Seacliff Beach. Seacliff Beach and Seacliff Park are among Leamington's oldest and historically significant public spaces. Seacliff Park was created in 1907 and was one of southwestern Ontario's popular summer destinations. Visitors came to enjoy a boathouse and a bathhouse, a baseball diamond, a boardwalk connecting the waterfront and dock to the park, a large pavilion for dances, picnics, and community events, and a pavilion for concerts and performances. The pavilion was one of the park's best-known landmarks and was said to have been built in 1914, which would have been the first year of World War I. It hosted dances, celebrations, and gatherings for years before being demolished in the 1950s. Today, Seacliff Beach is one of Essex County's most popular public beaches, with recreational amenities and connections to Pelee Island. What is called the Pelee Passage New Lighthouse is in between the mainland and Pelee Island, and Lighthouse Point Provincial Nature Reserve is on the northern end of Pelee Island. The base of the Pelee Passage New Lighthouse stands on a shoal that is 13 feet or 4 meters below the surface of the water. A shoal is defined as a place where a body of water is shallow and where a ridge, bank, or bar is close to the surface of the water and poses a danger to navigation. We are told the first lighthouse in the Pelee Passage was built in 1857, but it burned down in 1900. It was replaced with another lighthouse that lasted until 1975, when it was replaced by the current lighthouse. Next, the Lighthouse Point Provincial Nature Reserve. It has a lighthouse that was said to have been built around 1833 and said to be the second oldest Canadian lighthouse on Lake Erie. It also has rare species of plants and animals, though the land here is classified as wetlands, savannas, and the remnants of deciduous forests. Pelee Island is the southernmost permanently inhabited point in Canada. It is the largest island in Lake Erie and has one of the warmest climates in Canada, and is also a wine region. The Pelee Island Winery is one of Canada's largest. It started modern operations in the 1980s and also helped revive the historic viticulture on Pelee Island. The Stone Road Alvar Nature Reserve is on the southern end of Pelee Island. The Stone Road Alvar Nature Reserve preserves what is called a rare alvar ecosystem, which is a habitat where thin soil lies directly over flat limestone bedrock where only specialized plants and animals can survive. The reserve protects rare and endangered species like prairie plants not common in Canada, orchids, snakes and reptiles, migratory birds, and butterflies and moths. I want to point out that limestone was a common building material in the ancient world and used in constructions like the pyramids of Giza, and the Western Wall, also known as the Wailing Wall, an ancient limestone wall in the old city of Jerusalem. There are two things I would like to mention before I move on from here. The first is about lighthouses. I have no doubt that the original purpose of lighthouses is not what we were told, and that the people who took credit for building them did not build them. I think lighthouses were quite literally referring to a house for light, for the purposes of precisely distributing the energy generated by this gigantic integrated system that existed all over the earth, that was in perfect alignment with everything on earth and in heaven. Even the colossal Statue of Liberty was a lighthouse in Upper New York Bay and utilized as such from November 1st of 1886 until March 1st of 1902 in our historical record. And I have found that all lighthouses were in perfect alignment with the heavens, including solar, lunar, and Milky Way alignments. These are just a few of countless examples to show you what I'm talking about. They certainly became utilized as navigational aids, but I think that was because the land sheared off and sank right beside where they were located, creating the rocky and dangerous reefs and shallow areas in the waters that the lighthouses became needed for. The second thing I'd like to mention is the incredible fertility of the Great Lakes region with world-class vineyards, fruit orchards, and farming in general that I have found and documented throughout this series, particularly around Lakes Michigan, Huron, Ontario, and Erie, and a significant driver of the region. I suspect the agricultural productivity of this region to be in part due to a connection from the original energy grid system between the railroad, hydroelectric system, and all kinds of agricultural activity functioning as the original electroculture. Point Pelee National Park is to the southeast of Leamington and the northeast of Pelee Island. Point Pelee National Park is located on a narrow spit of land extending into Lake Erie that is the southernmost point of mainland Canada. It is a major stopover for migrating birds and monarch butterflies. The park contains marshes, beaches, savanna, and a rare Carolinian forest, a type of deciduous forest where plant and animal species are more commonly found in the Carolinas and other parts of the eastern United States. The southern tip of Point Pelee is a shifting sandbar where visitors can stand in water on both sides. Its shape is constantly changing from waves, currents, and changing lake levels. The Hillman Marsh Conservation Area is just a short distance from Point Pelee going north around the lakeshore. It is one of the largest remaining wetlands in Essex County and, like Point Pelee, known for having a Carolinian-type ecosystem and provides habitat for many rare and endangered plant and animal species. Hillman Marsh sits behind a natural barrier beach along Lake Erie, and in recent years erosion, storms, and high water levels have breached part of that barrier, exposing the marsh to stronger waves and changing water conditions. As a result, current restoration projects aim to rebuild and strengthen the barrier beach and improve wetland habitat. A barrier beach is defined as a long, low-lying strip of sand and dunes that runs parallel to the mainland, separated from it by a lagoon, marsh, or bay. An embayment is defined as a recess in a coastline forming a bay. Also interesting to note that the Hillman Marsh Conservation Area is located close to the Leamington Airport, which is another consistent finding of airports right next to wetlands, like estuaries and lagoons. Examples include, but are far from limited to, Sydney International Airport on Botany Bay in Australia, and JFK International Airport on Jamaica Bay in New York City, both of which are classified as estuaries. An estuary is defined as a partially enclosed coastal body of brackish water, which is water that is salty, dirty, and unpleasant, with one or more rivers flowing into it and a connection to the open sea. Now I'm going to head 38 miles or 61 kilometers east to the Rondeau West Breakwater Range Lighthouse and the Rondeau Provincial Park. The Rondeau Provincial Park is situated on a sandy peninsula featuring 7 miles or 11 kilometers of beaches and Carolinian forests. It is the second oldest provincial park in Ontario, having been established in 1894 after Algonquin Provincial Park was established in 1893. The West Breakwater Range Lighthouse of today is described as a 1912 square concrete tower and modified from an 1891 structure. To make a long story short, this is what we're told about the history of a lighthouse here. In 1843, Canada's Board of Works noted that there was scarcely one harbor on the Canadian side of Lake Erie which was not in a state of dilapidation, and that to remedy this, the board announced plans to convert the Rondeau Bay location into a good harbor by the construction of a breakwater and 2 piers. The government started dredging the sandbar, separating the bay from Lake Erie in 1844, building a set of parallel piers, and building a lighthouse. Then in 1876, 2 wooden lighthouses were erected and first lit on September 7th to allow ship captains to steer precisely into narrow channels, and that in 1891 the system was modernized with a new octagonal lighthouse constructed as shipping was increased. The lighthouse on the East Breakwater today is described as a steel skeletal tower that was built in 1905. As I make my way east across Lake Erie's north shore towards Long Point at a distance of 75 miles or 120 kilometers, I want to take a look in between these 2 places at the locations of Moraviantown and London. First, Moraviantown. The Battle of the Thames, also known as the Battle of Moraviantown, took place on October 5th of 1813. The Battle of the Thames was an American victory in the War of 1812 against Tecumseh's Confederacy and their British allies. As a result of the battle, Tecumseh was killed, his Confederacy fell apart, and the British lost control of southwestern Ontario. Today it is a location of the Moravian-on-the-Thames First Nation Reserve, a branch of the Lenape who were converted to Christianity by Moravian missionaries from Pennsylvania, one of the oldest Protestant denominations. At the time of the battle, the community of this First Nation, known as the Christian Munsee, was burned to the ground and rebuilt at its current location. The nearby Tecumseh Monument is a stone marker and a larger federal plaque at the location where Tecumseh was killed in action on the day of the battle. During the War of 1812, the historical figure of Lewis Cass rose through the officer ranks to become a brigadier general in the U.S. Army in March of 1813, and he took part in the Battle of the Thames. I first learned about Lewis Cass when I was researching the state of Michigan in my series on who is represented in the National Statuary Hall at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. I learned a lot about obscured history and what the official historical narrative tells us about what has taken place here from the research I have done so far on who is represented there. After having gone through approximately half of the states, I have found that regardless of fame or obscurity, the National Statuary Hall functions more or less as a who's who for the New World Order and its agenda. The state of Michigan is represented by Lewis Cass as well as Gerald Ford. Cass joined the Freemasons as an entered apprentice, the first degree of Freemasonry, at a lodge in Marietta, Ohio in 1803, and by May of 1804 he achieved the Master Mason degree, the third degree of Freemasonry. Lewis Cass was a charter member of the Lodge of Amity No. 5 in Zanesville, Ohio, admitted in June of 1805, and was one of the founders of the Grand Lodge of Ohio in January of 1808, serving as its Grand Master multiple years. Lewis Cass had been appointed as the governor of Michigan Territory by President James Madison in October of 1813, a position in which he served until 1831. During this time, he traveled frequently to negotiate treaties with the indigenous peoples in Michigan, in which they ceded substantial amounts of land. Cass resigned as the governor of Michigan in 1831 to become President Andrew Jackson's Secretary of War, a position he would hold for the next 5 years. As President Jackson's Secretary of War, Cass was central in implementing the Indian removal policy of the Jackson administration after Congress passed the Indian Removal Act in 1830. The Indian Removal Act was directed specifically at the 5 civilized tribes of the southeastern United States, the Cherokee, Creeks, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw, though it also affected tribes in Ohio, Illinois, and other areas east of the Mississippi River. Most were forced to Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska. The city of London, Ontario, is further up the Thames River from Moraviantown. Today, London has a population of close to 500,000 people and is the largest municipality in southwestern Ontario. It is centrally located at approximately 120 miles or 200 kilometers from both Toronto and Detroit, and 140 miles or 230 kilometers from Buffalo. In our historical narrative, the region has long been home to the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape peoples for tens of thousands of years. We are told John Graves Simcoe, the Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada from 1791 to 1796, selected this location as his preferred site for the capital of Upper Canada in 1793, and named it after the city of London and its River Thames, though the capital of Upper Canada ultimately became what is now Toronto. London was founded in 1826, incorporated as a town in 1840, and became a city on January 1st of 1855. Noteworthy places in London include Western University, which was founded in 1878, and Victoria Park in downtown London, a major community event venue with a band shell, the location of which was said to have started out as the site of a British garrison in 1838. The year of 1855 that London became a city was 2 years before Ottawa became the capital of Canada. Our historical narrative tells us that on New Year's Eve of 1857, Queen Victoria was presented with the responsibility of choosing the location for the permanent capital of Canada, with Ottawa being described as a small frontier town. The Parliament buildings pictured here were said to have been constructed between 1859 and 1866 in an architectural style called Gothic Revival. This is a view of Parliament Hill from the Rideau Canal. Next, I'm going to head down to Long Point from London. Long Point was established as a provincial park in May of 1921 and is described as one of Ontario's most remarkable natural landmarks. It stretches about 25 miles or 40 kilometers into Lake Erie from Norfolk County. It is the longest freshwater sand spit in the world and features dynamic sand dunes, wetlands, and rare Carolinian forests. It is also a critical stopover for migratory birds and waterfowl, as it lies on one of North America's busiest migratory bird flyways. Like Humbug Marsh back on the Detroit River in Michigan, Long Point is a Ramsar site designated to be of international importance. Following the American Revolution, Loyalists and other settlers began arriving in Norfolk County during the 1790s. Long Point itself remained sparsely settled because of its shifting sands, wetlands, and isolation, and because it wasn't a good location for farming, it became known for fishing, commercial waterfowl hunting, timber harvesting, and later recreation and tourism. Long Point has one of the most notorious reputations on the Great Lakes as it projects far into Lake Erie, creating shoals that extend well offshore. Historians estimate that hundreds of ships have been wrecked around Long Point over the past 2 centuries, leading some to nickname the area the graveyard of Lake Erie. We are told because of the dangers, several lighthouses were built on Long Point, and that the first was established in 1833 near the tip of the peninsula. The Long Point Lighthouse today was said to have been constructed in 1916, which would have been in the middle of World War I. It sits within a fragile wildlife reserve. There is also the historic Old Cut Lighthouse on Long Point. The Old Cut Lighthouse was said to have been built in 1879 to navigate a narrow channel called the Old Cut, which was said to have opened up during a storm in the 1830s. It was decommissioned in 1916 and sold into private hands. It remains standing today as a private residence. Interesting to note that in 1866, a group of sportsmen formed the Long Point Company and purchased much of the peninsula as a private hunting reserve, and the company still owns a significant portion of Long Point today. Now I'm going to move over from Long Point and take a look at the Port Dover area. I'm specifically interested in the Port Dover Lighthouse and the Lynn River Falls. Port Dover is an unincorporated community and former town. Its biggest claim to fame these days is the Friday the 13th motorcycle rally held every Friday the 13th, and in the summer months its attendance exceeds 100,000. We are told the first settlers in the area were United Empire Loyalists in 1794, and it was incorporated as a village in 1835 and later as a town. It lost its independent town status when it was incorporated into the new city of Nanticoke in 1974. The Port Dover Lighthouse is said to be one of the best-known landmarks on the north shore of Lake Erie and one of Ontario's oldest surviving small wooden harbor lighthouses. We are told the first lighthouse was built in this location around 1845 and 1846, and that it was rebuilt in 1847, which is the structure we see today. For much of the 19th century, Port Dover was an important commercial harbor for things like grain, lumber, coal, fish, and passengers. The Hamilton and Lake Erie Railway, the H&LER, began operating here in 1873 and was soon merged with the Hamilton and Northwestern Railway, which completed the final section from Port Dover to Jarvis in the mid-1870s. The Port Dover and Lake Huron Railway was one of the most important regional railways in southwestern Ontario during the late 19th century, and the line opened for traffic in 1875. It allowed Port Dover to develop into a busy shipping port and connected the agricultural Norfolk and Oxford counties to larger rail networks, and became the backbone of a rail system that reached Lake Huron. The South Norfolk Railway started operating in the county in 1889, an historic branch line that ran from Simcoe to Port Rowan and connecting indirectly to the primary lake port network centered around Port Dover via the Port Dover and Lake Huron Railway. The interurban that served Port Dover was the Lake Erie and Northern Railway, the LE&N, and operated for passenger service between 1916 and 1955. With freight service continuing until 1961. The route of the LE&N was Galt, which is now part of Cambridge, Brantford, Simcoe, and Port Dover. It used 1500-volt DC overhead, which was unusually high voltage for a North American interurban, and it became famous as the Dover Beach Train, carrying thousands of vacationers to Lake Erie's beaches in the summer months. We are told that in 1921 alone, it carried over 600,000 passengers. Portions of the local rail corridors, such as the Lynn Valley Trail, now serve as recreational trails connecting Simcoe and Port Dover. The Lynn Valley Trail follows the old railway line alongside the Lynn River between Simcoe and Port Dover. The Lynn River is described as a relatively important but small river in southwestern Ontario, flowing through the heart of Norfolk County and passing through Simcoe before emptying into Lake Erie at Port Dover. There are two reservoirs on the Lynn River, one at Crystal Lake in Simcoe and Silver Lake at Port Dover. Crystal Lake and Man-Made Reservoir is adjacent to Wellington Park in the heart of Simcoe. It features what is described as a small local landmark lighthouse. Silver Lake in Port Dover is described as one of its defining landmarks. It is an artificial lake that was created by damming the Lynn River in the mid-19th century. We are told the dam was created in 1856 in order to provide water power for the Norfolk Woolen Mill and other industries. We are told that for much of its history, Silver Lake was an economic driver for Port Dover, powering woolen and knitting mills, ice harvesting in the wintertime, greenhouse operations for local agriculture, and the former railway passed along its edge. This brings me to the Lynn River Falls. The Lynn River Falls are described as a small and picturesque waterfall about 3 to 6 feet or 1 to 2 meters high, and fall over a bedrock ledge in the valley near the mouth of the Lynn River, with the water flow of the falls affected by seasonal weather conditions. The falls are located on the east side of Port Dover, close to McQueen Cemetery, and not far from Silver Lake and the Lynn Valley Trail. There are several things I would like to make note of here. The first thing is that I consistently find present and past railroad lines running alongside rivers. There's the railroad that runs alongside the New River through the New River Gorge in West Virginia on the top left, alongside the Lehigh River through the Lehigh Gorge in Pennsylvania on the top right, the Royal Gorge Railroad alongside the Arkansas River going through the Royal Gorge in Colorado on the bottom left, and alongside the Sacramento River through the Sacramento River Canyon in California on the bottom right. I also consistently find hydroelectric dams and reservoir sites with railroads close by, like the Davis Island Lock and Dam in Avalon, Pennsylvania on the top left, the Wells Dam in Chelan, Washington on the top right, the John Day Dam and Umatilla Reservoir on the Columbia River between Washington and Oregon on the bottom left, and on the bottom right, the flooding of Toledo when the Dalles Dam was completed in Oregon. Toledo was one of the oldest continuously inhabited places in North America. Then there are cemeteries. I have found waterfalls and cemeteries co-located, like in Buffalo, New York, where Skagwada Creek passes over Serenity Falls and the Forest Lawn Cemetery on its way to Delaware Park. Forest Lawn Cemetery is next to Delaware Park. Delaware Park was considered the centerpiece of the Buffalo Olmsted Park System, New York's oldest system of paths and pathways, which included 6 parks, 7 parkways, 8 landscaped circles, and other public spaces said to have been designed with Calvert Vaux between 1868 and 1876, the famous duo of landscape architects who also received credit for the design of Central Park in New York City in our historical narrative. We are told that Olmsted dammed Skagwada Creek to create what is called Hoyt Lake today, and that was a feature during the 1901 Pan American Exposition in Buffalo. The last point I would like to make here is about waterfalls. I've been stating my belief throughout this series that the Great Lakes were formed from tremendous amounts of water from the outflow of the waterfalls and the interconnected hydrology of the canal system found throughout the Great Lakes region. This map gives you an idea of just how many waterfalls are found throughout the region, and it is very important to note there are many more waterfalls than what is shown here. I think the sophisticated free energy grid was destroyed, and the water flowed in and filled in the land the Great Lakes occupy today. I've found examples throughout this series of waterfalls that flow directly into their lakes today, like the Columbia Beach Falls in Columbia Park near Bay Village, Ohio, on the south side of Lake Erie, are noteworthy for flowing directly into the lake. When I was looking at the shores of Lake Superior in the first part of this series, I found the Sable Falls at the northeastern end of the Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore in Michigan. Sable Falls flows 75 feet or 23 meters over sandstone formations directly into Lake Superior. Then there is the Niagara Falls region between New York and Ontario along the Niagara River between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. Niagara Falls has been called a hydroelectric mecca. Niagara Falls is capable of producing 4 million kilowatts of electricity, which is shared by the United States and Canada, and is also noteworthy for its present-day and historic hydroelectric and power generation facilities. Niagara Falls is the largest waterfall by volume in North America, consisting of a group of 3 waterfalls on the Niagara River spanning the international border between New York and Ontario, Horseshoe Falls in Ontario, and Bridal Veil Falls and American Falls in New York. 3,160 tons of water flow over all 3 of the Niagara Falls every second, with water plunging 32 feet or 10 meters every second, hitting the base with 280 tons of force at the American and Bridal Veil Falls, and 2,509 tons of force at the Horseshoe Falls. The water from Niagara Falls flows north on the Niagara River into Lake Ontario. Next, from Port Dover, I'm going to move on over to the Port Maitland and Dunnville area. I'm particularly interested in looking at the Port Maitland Lighthouse, Rock Point Provincial Park, Mohawk Island Lighthouse, and the Dunnville Autodrome, the wind turbines, and number 6 RCAF Dunnville Museum next to the Autodrome. Port Maitland straddles the mouth of the Grand River where it enters Lake Erie. It was named after Sir Peregrine Maitland, who was the Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada from 1818 to 1828. The Grand River is the largest river that is entirely within southern Ontario's boundaries, flowing for 170 miles or 280 kilometers south from Wareham, Ontario, to Port Maitland, Ontario, on the north shore of Lake Erie. It flows through the cities of Waterloo, Kitchener, and Brantford, as well as the Six Nations of the Grand River Reserve of the Haudenosaunee people. This is the only place in North America where all Six Nations of the Haudenosaunee live together, and we are told on land that was granted by the British Crown for allegiance during the American Revolution as compensation for lands lost in New York. The original land grant was 960,000 acres, or 388,500 hectares, and it has shrunk to the reserve covering 46,000 acres, or 18,615 hectares, which is about 5% of the original land grant. The first five nations of the Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy, were the Seneca, Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, and Cayuga. The Tuscarora were accepted into the Confederacy in 1722 and became known as the Six Nations. The Haudenosaunee are a confederacy bound by the Great Law of Peace, a constitution that established a representative government and is still in use today. The Grand River also has numerous waterfalls along its course, including, but not limited to, the Elora Gorge Falls and the Devil's Creek Falls, which empties into the Grand River, among the many other waterfalls in the area on the Niagara Escarpment around Hamilton. Hamilton is called the City of Waterfalls. There are more than 100 waterfalls and cascades in the city limits of Hamilton, which is one of the highest number of waterfalls for any urban areas of its size. Now back to Port Maitland and the lighthouses there. We are told the Port Maitland Lighthouse dates back to the 19th century, with navigational lights established as shipping increased through the nearby canal system, which I will talk more about when I get to Port Colborne shortly. The lighthouse is said to date from 1898 and is located on the west pier of the Grand River entrance. It is still an active aid to navigation. We are told that Rock Point Provincial Park is one of the hidden gems on the north shore of Lake Erie. The park's signature attraction is its exposed limestone shelf or ledge, where you can see marine fossils embedded in the flat rock shoreline. Interesting to note from our historical narrative that a rock ledge became the landing place for riverboats and wagon trains starting in 1833 on the south side of the Missouri River at what became Kansas City, Missouri. And all of these strata of limestone were above the surface where that rock ledge was located, underneath layers of soil and trees. The loess and colluvium marked in this graphic are both types of loose materials, with loess referring to wind-blown silt, and colluvium referring to loose material that has moved downhill. The Mohawk Island Lighthouse is visible from Rock Point Provincial Park, where it is located just offshore. We are told that construction began on it in 1846 and was completed around 1848 to protect ships navigating one of Canada's busiest commercial routes in the mid-1800s. At that time, our narrative tells us that Port Maitland was the southern entrance of the Welland Canal, and ships had to navigate the dangerous shoals around Mohawk Island. It is 59 feet or 18 meters tall and built entirely of limestone. We are told it was designed with the lighthouse keeper's residence attached directly to the tower, and is believed to be the only surviving stone lighthouse with the integrated keeper's residence. It was abandoned in the 20th century and remains an impressive ruin today. It was under consideration for demolition until local residents rallied around its preservation, and the lighthouse was preserved in the Mohawk Island National Wildlife Area in 1978. Next up, the Dunnville Autodrome and the wind turbines and No. 6 RCAF Dunnville Museum next to the Autodrome, and all three are situated next to a large bend in the Grand River. The Dunnville Autodrome was described as a road course built on the grounds of the former Dunnville Airport, having been repurposed from one of the old World War II airfield's runways into a paved road course for race events. It was permanently closed in 2009, though the former circuit still exists on the former airfield, though it is no longer operated as a public racing venue. We are told the property began life as RCAF Station Dunnville during World War II, where it became home to the No. 6 Service Flying Training School between 1940 and 1944. After the war, the airfield was used for aviation, including becoming the Dunnville Airport, until part of the airfield was converted into the Dunnville Autodrome in 2004. Today, the former airport property is home to the No. 6 RCAF Dunnville Museum, which preserves the site's aviation history. The wind turbines at this location are part of the Grand Renewable Wind Farm, one of the largest renewable energy projects in southern Ontario during the Green Energy Act era. The site was incorporated into the larger Grand Renewable Energy Park. Construction began in 2013, and the wind and solar farm entered into commercial operation in December of 2014. I would like to mention my belief that the original energy grid is being utilized by the energy industry unbeknownst to the general population, and that some other form of energy besides wind is powering these gigantic turbines. We are told that these are wind turbines, yet all of the wind turbines that are running go at the same speed, regardless of whether or not the wind is blowing. The next place I'm going to take a look at is Port Colborne, 11 miles or 18 kilometers east of Port Maitland. Port Colborne is the southern end of the Welland Canal in southern Ontario's Niagara region. The Niagara region occupies most of the Niagara Peninsula and is bounded in the north by Lake Ontario, to the south by Lake Erie, and in the east by the Niagara River. The Niagara region is an important center of agriculture, including viticulture and tourism. The Niagara Peninsula is the largest and most concentrated winemaking region in Canada, from the vineyards that flourish on what are called the benchlands of the Niagara Escarpment. The Welland Canal passes through this part of the Niagara Peninsula between St. Catharines Port Weller on Lake Ontario on the northern end and Port Colborne on Lake Erie on the southern end. The Welland Canal allows ships to go up and down the Niagara Escarpment, and according to our historical narrative, it has followed 4 different routes since it first opened in November of 1829. It is part of the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Great Lakes Waterway. The St. Lawrence Waterway is described as the system of rivers, canals, locks, and channels in the northern United States and eastern Canada that allows ocean-going vessels to travel from the Atlantic Ocean throughout the Great Lakes region of North America. We are told the Great Lakes Waterway is a system of natural channels and artificial locks and canals that allow for the navigation between all of the Great Lakes, with the major civil engineering works being the Welland Canal between Lakes Ontario and Erie, and the Soo Locks between Lake Superior and Huron, and what are called dredged channels in the St. Mary's River, the Detroit River, Lake St. Clair, and the St. Clair River between Lakes Huron and Erie. The Onondaga Escarpment runs right through Port Colborne and can be seen driving from Welland, Ontario to Port Colborne on Highway 58. The Onondaga Escarpment runs east to west along the northern shoreline of Lake Erie. The Niagara Escarpment also runs predominantly east to west, from New York along the south shore of Lake Ontario and then on up through Ontario, Michigan, Illinois, and Wisconsin, with a nice half-circle shape attached to a straight line when drawn on a map. When I first saw the map of the region's waterfalls, it struck me how many there are on the Ontario side of Lake Huron and the Georgian Bay, including a series of waterfalls running along the Niagara Escarpment from Niagara Falls. In western New York State, the Niagara Escarpment runs from Lewiston at the international border with Canada and trends easterly for 79 miles or 127 kilometers to just beyond Rochester, and the Onondaga Escarpment runs for 62 miles or 100 kilometers from Buffalo in an easterly direction to just beyond Caledonia. Both escarpments feature numerous waterfalls. These examples are in New York State. I strongly suspect that these escarpments and their waterfalls were intentionally designed components of the hydroelectric infrastructure of the original energy grid and were not natural in origin, as we have been taught to believe. We are told that breaks on the limestone ridge of the Onondaga Escarpment allowed water from Lake Erie to flow into the Wainfleet Bog Conservation Area near Port Colborne. The Wainfleet Bog is the largest remaining bog in southern Ontario and provides habitat for a variety of unique plants and animals. Interesting to note what appear to be megalithic stone blocks lying around the base of the signage here. They are not supposed to be here, so we don't see them as such. Here are some other examples of what I'm talking about. The 18-Mile Creek Conservation Park on the south shore of Lake Erie in western New York State, a recreational area for hiking, fishing, and wildlife viewing, is described by things like having difficult access and hard to find with little signage, apart from the parking area and limited trail signage. The parking area here is surrounded by megalithic stone blocks. I had the same experience when I was looking for the Turkey Mountain Urban Wilderness area in Tulsa, Oklahoma, many years ago when I was first waking up to all of this. It was on the map, but hard to find, with little signage apart from the parking area and limited trail signage. The parking lot for Turkey Mountain was also surrounded by megalithic stone blocks, and they were the size of VW buses. The hiding of this ancient advanced civilization in plain sight was accomplished by shaping the false narrative, educating us in it, and reinforcing it with images coming from Hollywood, literature, art. It's not supposed to be there, so we don't see it. We don't even think it. Interesting to note that there was an historic railway through the Wainfleet Bog. The Erie Peat Railway is described as a small, narrow-gauge railway that operated inside the Wainfleet Bog between 1940 until the mid-1980s to haul harvested peat moss from deep inside the bog to the local processing plant. There was a prisoner of war camp here during World War II between August of 1943 and November of 1945, from which the German prisoners provided labor for the Erie Peat Company. Next, from Port Colborne, I'm going to head east 9 miles, or 14 kilometers, to the Point Abineau Lighthouse. We are told the Point Abineau Lighthouse is one of the most architecturally distinctive lighthouses in Canada. It was said to have been built in the Greek Revival style between 1917 and 1918, which would have been during World War I. The Abineau Point Lighthouse still houses its third-order Fresnel lens, one of only 16 lighthouses out of the 200 remaining lighthouses, out of what was originally estimated to be 350 to 400 lighthouses, to have its original Fresnel lens. The next place we come to is Windmill Point, approximately 5 miles or 9 kilometers from Point Abineau. Both of these locations have a Fort Erie, Ontario postal code. The Windmill Point Lighthouse was less well known than the Point Abineau Lighthouse, and unlike the one at Point Abineau, no longer exists. We are told the name Windmill Point refers to a community that developed when Loyalist settler Silas Carter built a grist mill here, and a place where farmers from across the region brought their grain to be milled. Then we are told as shipping increased on Lake Erie, a lighthouse was established at the Windmill Point location to help vessels navigate the shoreline. Crystal Beach is located in between Point Abineau and Windmill Point. This was the historic location of the Crystal Beach Amusement Park. It first opened in 1888 and was in operation until 1989. In 1896, the Ontario Southern Railway began to provide a connection between the park and the mainline rail station in Ridgeway. There's no active rail station in Ridgeway today. The original Grand Trunk Railway Station was moved in 1975 and is now part of the Fort Erie Railway Museum. And the rails through here have been converted into the Friendship Trail multi-use path, which runs for 15 miles or 24 kilometers from Fort Erie to Port Colborne, parallel to the north shore of Lake Erie. Ferry service had connected the park with nearby Buffalo starting in the 1890s, and ferries like the SS Canadiana operated between Buffalo and Crystal Beach Park from 1910 to 1956. The park was known for its innovative roller coasters, most notably the Backety-Back Scenic Railway, which was in operation from 1909 to 1926. The Cyclone, pictured here next to the Crystal Ballroom, and the Cyclone was in operation from 1927 to 1946. And the Comet, which was in operation at Crystal Beach from 1948 to 1989 when the amusement park closed. It was subsequently relocated to the Great Escape Fun Park in Queensbury, New York in 1994 and is still in operation today. The Crystal Ballroom at Crystal Beach first opened in the spring of 1925 as the largest unobstructed dance hall in North America, which could hold up to 3,000 dancers on its gleaming wooden floor. We are told it was built by George C. Hall Sr. and featured a unique cantilevered design with no interior support posts or beams. It was a popular venue during the Big Band era. Its fate was ultimately demolition after the Crystal Beach Amusement Park closed in 1989. This brings us towards the end of our journey around Lake Erie as we next head into Fort Erie. Here I'm going to take a look at places like, but not limited to, the International Railway Bridge, the Peace Bridge, and Old Fort Erie. The International Railway Bridge and the Peace Bridge connect Fort Erie, Ontario, and Buffalo, New York. First, the International Railway Bridge. A steel truss swing bridge, it is said to be the oldest bridge at this location. We are told it was originally constructed between 1870 and 1873 for the International Bridge Company to provide an American link to connect the Grand Trunk Railway of Canada with American lines, and was designed and built by Sir Casimir Gazowski, and we are told that it was later strengthened in 1901. It was a crucial trade link in the 19th century and is still in use for freight traffic by the Canadian National and Canadian Pacific Railways today. Sir Casimir Gazowski was a Polish-born Canadian civil engineer and political figure known for his work on a wide variety of Canadian railways in our historical narrative, including, but not limited to, the New York and Erie Railway, the Atlantic and St. Lawrence Railway, and sections of the Grand Trunk Railway. He was knighted by Queen Victoria in 1897. At its peak in the mid-20th century, the Fort Erie Yard was one of CN's principal maintenance and interchange facilities in southern Ontario, and included a large classification yard, diesel and car repair shops, a roundhouse and turntable, and connections to the International Railway Bridge, making it a key gateway between Canada and the United States. The railway was so central to the town that historical accounts estimate more than half of Fort Erie's workforce was employed by the railways during the industry's heyday. The former CN Rail Yard in Fort Erie was closed around 1989 and was turned into the Niagara Railway Museum. Everything that was once there, including the roundhouse, is long gone, like what we saw at the CN Flat Rock Yard back in Michigan. On the American side, Canadian rail traffic is received by the Black Rock Rail Yard. We are told the rail yard was built as the northern terminus of the Buffalo and Black Rock Railroad, a horse-powered line from downtown Buffalo. The rail yard is surrounded by old residential neighborhoods and some abandoned industrial facilities. Most of the rail bed in the yard has been ripped up. The nearby Black Rock Lock allows vessels to bypass rapids on the Niagara River at the outlet of Lake Erie. We are told the Black Rock Lock was the first lock constructed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in 1833 for the Erie Canal, and that it was enlarged in 1913. The Erie Canal in New York State runs for 351 miles or 565 kilometers between Lake Erie at Buffalo to the Hudson River near Albany. It was said to have been constructed starting on July 4th of 1817 and first opened on October 26th of 1825. In our historical narrative, the opening of the Erie Canal made it the first navigable waterway connecting the Atlantic region to the Great Lakes and accelerated the settlement of the Great Lakes region, the westward expansion of the United States, as it greatly reduced the cost of transporting people and goods across the Appalachian Mountains. The Richardson-Olmsted complex is also near this location. We are told that the Richardson-Olmsted complex is in the architectural style called Richardsonian Romanesque, after architect Henry Hobson Richardson, who was said to have first used elements of this style in what was originally the Buffalo State Asylum for the Insane, which he was said to have designed in 1870, and for which Frederick Law Olmsted was the landscape architect. Like the previously mentioned Northern Michigan Asylum in Traverse City, the Kirkbride Plan treatment for people with mental illness was implemented here. The Buffalo State Asylum for the Insane was closed for that purpose in the 1970s and became known as the Richardson-Olmsted Complex, and it was repurposed as a hotel, which opened in 2023. Also, like the former Northern Michigan Asylum, the village at Grand Traverse Commons, it is considered to be haunted. And not only that, one of the most haunted places in Buffalo, if not western New York. The Peace Bridge is located to the south of the International Railway Bridge. With regards to the Peace Bridge, we are told the idea of a bridge joining the United States and Canada was discussed as early as 1853, though actual construction of the bridge didn't start until August 17th of 1925 and first opened on June 1st of 1927. Typically, we don't ask questions about what we are told, because why on earth would we be lied to? But consider if what we had been told about the construction is consistent with the engineering required to build these massive bridges. Next, Old Fort Erie. Now the Fort Erie National Historic Site of Canada. We are told the original Old Fort Erie was constructed by the British in 1764 as a supply depot for British troops after the 1763 Treaty of Paris, signed at the end of the French and Indian War, in which France ceded its territories east of the Mississippi River to Great Britain. It served as a supply depot and port for ships transporting merchandise, troops, and passengers via Lake Erie to the upper Great Lakes. Most of the present fort was said to have been built between 1805 and 1808. During the War of 1812, we are told the Americans attacked Fort Erie twice, captured it and abandoned it in 1813, then recaptured it in 1814, and abandoned it when they returned to Buffalo in the winter of 1814. This concludes my 9-part series around all of the Great Lakes, which started a year ago when I uploaded the first part on Lake Superior on June 8th of 2025. In this series, I have looked in depth at cities and places all around the shores of Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Ontario, and Lake Erie, paying particular attention to lighthouses, railroad and streetcar history, waterfalls, wetlands and dunes, interstates and highways, golf courses, airports and racetracks, major corporate players, mines and mining, labor relations, and many other things. In particular, by following the location of lighthouses and waterfalls around the Great Lakes, this particular focus has yielded a great deal of information as to what I believe happened here and about our hidden history. I believe there was a highly sophisticated and highly controlled hydrological and electrical system throughout the Great Lakes region that was an integral part of the Earth's original free energy grid system, and I have done my best to show you, with the information I have found along the way, exactly why I believe, among many other things, that the destruction of the original energy grid created the landscape we see today, and that the Great Lakes were formed by tremendous amounts of water from the outflow of the waterfalls and the interconnected hydrological system when the original energy grid was destroyed, and as quickly as possible was replaced by non-renewable energy resources that exist in limited supplies. The research for this series has taken around a month to complete for each part, and there's a lot of information in each one, but I've barely scratched the surface of the hidden information that is available to find tucked away in this region.